At the edge of the Duke of Ashcombe's northern estate, where the hedgerows thinned and the land sloped toward frozen marsh, there lived a woman the village no longer named. They called her widow, as if the word itself were sufficient burial, and they spoke it with the same tone reserved for ruin and warning. Each morning, as church bells cut the frostic air, she bent to the earth with a spade too heavy for her narrow hands, while eyes followed her from behind lace curtains and market stalls, judging the scandal of her persistence. Winter had arrived early that year, stern and unrelenting. Snow crusted the fields like old salt, and the sky remained a permanent pewter lid. The widow worked regardless. She wore a patched cloak and boots worn thin at the heel, yet her movements were deliberate, practiced, almost scholarly. What the villagers mocked as madness was, in truth, method. She carved into the soil with care, reinforcing the shallow pit with timber scavenged from fallen fencing, sealing gaps with clay, measuring angles as her father once had when he kept accounts and keys for a great house now lost to her. Her father had been a steward, a man of ink-stained fingers and quiet authority, who taught his only child that survival depended not on strength, but foresight. From him she learned how cold crept, how damp rotted bone, how earth, when respected, could become shelter. From the world beyond him, she learned far harsher lessons. She learned how swiftly a woman could be erased when her presence complicated power, how records could be altered, how a name might vanish as cleanly as breath on glass. The village did not know this. They saw only a solitary figure digging like a creature half wild, half broken. Children laughed openly. Men shook their heads with smug pity. Women whispered that grief had unsettled her reason, that no decent widow would choose dirt over charity. On Sundays, she sat at the back pew, hands folded, eyes lowered, absorbing judgment as one absorbs cold, without protest, without sound. By dusk, the shallow shelter had taken shape beneath the hawthorn thicket. When the wind rose, she climbed inside, lowering herself with a care born of long practice. Within, a small fire glowed, its light licking the packed walls, revealing shelves with dried roots, folded blankets, and a single book wrapped in cloth. Here, underground, the world's laughter could not reach her. Here, memory pressed closer. She remembered silk once, and candlelight refracted through crystal. She remembered vows spoken softly, meant only for two souls and God. She remembered the night she was told to leave, not as a wife, but as a problem requiring removal. The carriage ride, the papers, the silence that followed. She had died neatly, on parchment, while her body continued its stubborn breathing. Snow began to fall in earnest as night deepened, thick flakes blotting the landscape into abstraction. Far to the south, in London's gaslit corridors, the Duke of Ashcombe concluded his final winter engagement. He was a man of 40 years, tall, composed, and worn by duty more than age. Court had taught him restraint, loss had taught him economy of feeling, and he carried both like armor. Reports of unrest on his northern lands had summoned him home, though he did not yet know the nature of what waited there. His departure went unnoticed by the widow, crouched in her earthen refuge, as wind howled above like an accusation. She fed the fire sparingly, listening to the world freeze. Her fingers traced the edge of a small object hidden beneath her collar, smooth from years of touch. It anchored her, this relic of another life, reminding her that she had once been seen fully, if briefly. By morning, the village awoke to drifts high enough to silence mockery. Doors would not open. Roads vanished. Horses refused the cold. From the manor miles away, lanterns moved through white darkness as word spread of impassable paths and missing tenants. Somewhere beneath the snow, the widow waited, breath measured, faith worn thin but unbroken. When the storm finally lifted, it revealed more than buried fields. It revealed the fragile lies upon which comfort had rested. For the Duke's carriage, delayed by ice and fate, turned northward into a landscape stripped of illusion, carrying with it a man who believed himself long widowed, and a truth the winter had preserved, waiting to be unearthed. The widow sensed change before it arrived. There was a tightening in the air, a pause between gusts, as if the land itself were holding its breath. She climbed from the shelter at dawn to brush snow from the entrance, her breath blooming pale before her face. From this rise she could see the distant road, a thin dark line cutting through white. Once, that road had brought her away from everything she loved. She did not allow herself to wonder what it might yet deliver. In the manor, servants spoke of unusual resolve in their master. The Duke questioned ledgers himself, examined maps, listened where others dismissed. He noted an absence, an irregularity near the estate's edge, a place where rents had ceased without explanation. It troubled him more than it should have. He had learned, through costly error, that what went unexamined often concealed the greatest loss. That evening, as the widow returned underground, she failed to notice the distant lantern glow moving slowly across the snow, deliberate and searching. The firelight warmed her face as she sat in silence, unaware that the life she had survived in shadow was, at last, drawing the attention of the man who had once sworn never to let her walk alone. Outside, the snow creaked beneath unseen footsteps, steady and unhurried, crossing ground long thought forgotten. The widow stirred, listening, a quiet tremor passing through her chest, for some instincts do not fade with burial, and some promises, though broken, still know the way home at last now. The lantern light wavered against the snow as the Duke of Ashcombe dismounted, his boots sinking into drifts that swallowed the path he knew by memory. The storm had scattered his escort, forcing prudence where authority once sufficed, and now only silence answered his call. He advanced alone, guided by instinct sharpened through years of command, toward the estate's neglected boundary, where no tenant should have lingered. Each step unsettled him, for the land bore signs of intention. Tracks half buried, branches cut cleanly, snow disturbed by careful hands rather than chance. He found the hawthorn thicket at twilight, its thorns glazed with ice like crystal pins. Beneath it, warmth breathed faintly from the ground. The Duke paused, struck by a sensation he refused to name, then called out with measured courtesy, as if addressing an equal rather than an intruder. From below came the scrape of stone, the soft rustle of cloth, and then she emerged, firelight at her back, eyes lifted without fear, yet edged with restraint. For a moment, neither spoke. The Duke took in her face, pale but composed, marked not by madness but endurance. The widow met his gaze with the calm of one accustomed to dismissal, yet something in his posture arrested her breath. He removed his hat, a reflex of breeding, and apologized for the intrusion. His voice, low and even, carried an authority softened by uncertainty. She answered formally, addressing him as my lord, though her tone held no servility, only distance. He asked how long she had lived there. She replied with precision, measuring time by winters rather than months. When he inquired why, her gaze dropped briefly, then returned steady. Necessity, she said, as if the word explained all. Snow began to fall again, finer now, threading the air between them. The Duke gestured toward the shelter, incredulous, yet impressed by its soundness. She explained its construction without embellishment, speaking as one educated, correcting his assumptions gently, almost unconsciously. As they spoke, familiarity tugged at him like a misremembered dream. A cadence in her speech, a manner of folding her hands, stirred something long sealed. He dismissed it as fatigue. He had buried grief with diligence, turning memory into a ledger balanced and closed. Yet the winter seemed intent on reopening accounts. The wind rose sharply, forcing them closer. The Duke offered his cloak. She hesitated, pride warring with cold, then accepted with a quiet nod. The fabric, heavy and fine, brushed her fingers, and she stiffened, recognition flashing before she mastered it. He noticed, his eyes narrowing slightly, attentive rather than suspicious. They descended into the shelter together, ducking beneath the low beam. Inside, the air was warm, scented faintly of peat and dried herbs. The Duke examined the space with professional interest, noting its order, its restraint. This was no vagrant's hole. He remarked upon a book on the shelf, its binding worn but cared for. She replied that it had been a wedding gift, then caught herself, color rising to her cheeks. Silence fell, dense and charged. The Duke sat opposite her, the fire between them casting long shadows. He asked carefully, "Whose wedding?" Her answer came after a pause measured enough to suggest deliberation rather than hesitation. "My own," she said. "Many years passed." He inclined his head, offering condolences. She accepted them without gratitude, as if morning had long ceased to respond to kindness. Snow beat harder against the earth above. The Duke spoke of the estate, of records lost, of confusion surrounding abandoned cottages. She listened, then corrected him, naming places he believed forgotten. When he asked how she knew, she said her father had once served here, steward to a previous generation. The word steward struck him with unexpected force, stirring a memory of ink-stained ledgers and a girl standing quietly in the doorway, watching. He studied her anew. There it was, the same thoughtful stillness, the same habit of listening before speaking. His pulse quickened. He asked her name. She gave it, softly, and the sound fractured his composure. It was a name he had not spoken in years, a name removed from correspondence, from public acknowledgement, preserved only in private regret. The widow saw the change in him, the flicker of shock he could not fully conceal. She reached instinctively for the object at her collar, drawing it free. In the firelight, the Duke recognized his own signet ring, altered only by time. He rose slowly, breath shallow, the world narrowing to that small circle of gold. She told him then, without accusation, of the separation arranged for convenience, of letters unanswered, of the decree that named her dead to spare embarrassment. Her voice did not tremble. It no longer needed to. The Duke listened as though to a sentence passed upon his soul, every word binding. Above them, footsteps crunched, distant voices calling his name. The world was closing in again. He looked at her, truly looked, and spoke with a gravity that left no room for doubt. "You were never lost," he said. "I failed to find you." Her eyes shone, not with tears, but with something harder won. As the voices drew nearer, the Duke extended his hand, not in command but invitation, and the winter seemed to pause, waiting for her answer. The Duke did not release his hand when the voices neared, nor did he raise his own in response. He stood between her and the approaching lanterns, his posture unmistakably protective, as if the earth itself had entrusted her to his keeping. When his servants arrived, breathless and startled to find their master there, he greeted them with composure and instructed them to return to the manor. His tone permitted no questions. The widow watched, astonished, as obedience followed without hesitation, and with it came a subtle shift in the balance of the world. They emerged together into the open night. Snow lay smooth and unbroken around them, reflecting lantern light like a pale mirror. The Duke offered his arm. This time she did not hesitate. Her gloved hand rested upon his sleeve, light but certain, and the gesture carried more meaning than any proclamation. As they walked, she felt the warmth of him steady her steps, not as a savior, but as an equal reclaiming shared ground. At the manor gates, the household stirred, whispers rippling faster than wind through bare branches. The Duke neither hurried nor slowed. He led her through halls she remembered in fragments, though now they seemed smaller, stripped of the grandeur that once intimidated her. Firelight leapt in the hearth, casting gold upon portraits, whose eyes followed their passage with painted disapproval. In the great drawing-room, he dismissed the servants with a glance. Silence settled, thick and expectant. He turned to her, his expression resolute yet open, and asked if she would sit. She did, smoothing her cloak with habitual dignity. He spoke then, not as Duke, but as husband long silenced. He acknowledged his failure without excuse, naming it plainly, and the honesty of it loosened something tight within her chest. She answered with equal candor. She spoke of survival without bitterness, of nights underground where memory was both torment and companion. She did not accuse him of cruelty, only absence. He received this as deserved, his gaze steady, his breathing controlled, though each word struck deep. The fire crackled, punctuating the truth neither could soften. When he asked what she wished now, she surprised them both by pausing. Desire had once been a dangerous luxury. At last she said she wished for her name restored, not whispered nor footnoted, but spoken without shame. He nodded, understanding the weight of such a request. Reputation, he knew, was a currency more fragile than gold. The next morning dawned clear, the storm spent. The Duke ordered the household assembled. He stood before them with her at his side, his hand resting lightly at her back, a gesture unmistakable in its meaning. He introduced her not as guest nor charity, but as his wife, returned. Gasps followed, then silence heavy with recalculation. No one contradicted him. News traveled quickly, as it always did. By afternoon, neighbors arrived under pretense of concern. The Duke received them with courtesy sharpened by finality. He did not explain. He did not defend. He simply stood with her, letting the truth assert itself by presence alone. Some faces softened, others hardened. None prevailed. Later, alone again, she stood by the window overlooking the grounds. Workers dismantled the shelter near the hawthorn, carefully, respectfully, preserving its timbers. She watched without regret. That place had saved her, but it would not define her. The Duke joined her, offering tea. Their shoulders brushed, tentative yet promising. He spoke of rebuilding trust, as one rebuilds land after frost, patiently, season by season. She replied that she no longer feared winter. They shared a quiet smile, unburdened by expectation. Outside, snowmelt traced new paths through soil long held rigid. As dusk settled, a carriage arrived bearing sealed correspondence from London. The Duke read it by lamplight, his brow furrowing. He looked to her, weighing words yet unspoken. Whatever resistance awaited them would not come gently. He folded the letter, met her gaze, and said only that the past was not finished with them yet. She reached for his hand first this time, her grip firm, eyes unwavering. "Let it come," she said softly. Together, they watched the last light fade, knowing that though dignity had been reclaimed, the world beyond those walls would soon demand its reckoning again.